A very good evening and welcome to this edition of the Fourth Estate. Charles Mongu Shampagi. Exchanges between church leaders and the political players, particularly there were comments towards the end of last year by church leaders on Christmas Day itself, and after that responses from especially the political types, government spokespeople, Ofono Pondo, exchanges, comments from among others, people like Kano Shaban Bantariza, retired, and finally an exchange on the day of the burial of former Archbishop Livingstone Impala Nyinkoyoyo, where church leaders, both from the Anglican Church and the Catholic Church, commented on their role in moderating or talking about the political situation in the country. What should be, what is the relationship between the church and the politics, and how can we understand it? That's the discussion we'll be having. I know a lot of people, especially around Kampala, are following and excited about the news of what is going on by the crackdown by one arm of security against Border 2010. We'll have other opportunity to discuss that on other shows, and we're reporting the stories in the news on what is going on, but we'll discuss that later. To discuss the critical topic about the relationship between the church and politics, tonight, with me in studio, let me start by a man who's not just at the center of politics, has been there, has run for president several times, but also is a church leader in his own right. Dr. Abed Bwanika, very nice to have you on the show tonight.
Thank you, and good evening, viewers. It's nice to be here.
Dr. Bwanika, just two clarifications I need to get from you for the record. How many times have you run for president?
3 times.
3 times.
Yeah.
So 2006,
2006,
2011,
11, and
2016. Very nice to have you. And you also are a church leader. What's the name of your church?
I've been a church leader for the last 25 years, and our church right now is where I'm centered is Christ Witness Church. We are based in Intinda.
Based in Intinda, Christ Witness Church.
But we are countrywide. We have churches everywhere in the country.
Honor Peter Ekomoloit, I have no idea what his church leanings are, but I know that he's a journalist. He served the president and has been a member of parliament. So when it comes to politics, he's been at the very close quarters, because time in State House and time in Parliament gets him very close to the politics, as close as you can get.
Good evening. I have a very interesting history with the church. As a young primary school pupil, my ambition was to become a reverend.
Wow.
A reverend of the Anglican Church?
Yeah, local reverend. You know, he was such a powerful figure, and I wanted to become one.
What happened along the way?
That's a story for another day.
And Dr. Pade Musana. Dr. Pade Musana is the head of the Religious and Peace Studies Department at Makerere University. Is that correct?
I was head. I'm no longer head.
Okay.
We change power in our university.
Where doesn't power change?
I don't know.
But Dr. Pade Musana, with Angus Crichton and Caroline Howell, edited a book, The Ugandan Churches and the Political Center. Now, this book came out sometime around September last year.
True.
September last year. The coincidence of it coming out in September and what we saw of the church leaders' comments as we debated the age limit amendment in Parliament was a huge coincidence. We did run a review of it in the East African last week, if someone is interested. But quite interesting issues the book covers, quite a number of chapters, and was a good opportunity to have you come and help us understand what's going on, to break it down.
Thank you, Charles.
Thank you. I want to start with you, Dr. Musana. You've watched, you followed the exchanges between church leaders. It started in Fort Portal. The bishop of the Anglican Church of Rwenzori Diocese, the bishop of the Catholic Diocese, Fort Portal Diocese, all came out, made it clear, attended an event, a political event, where they expressed that they did not support the amendment of the Constitution. Then you had a bishop, I think, someone in West Nile, a church leader in West Nile, a church leader in northern Uganda, and others who spoke. Towards the climax, once the amendment had been passed, the vice president goes to attend Christmas prayers in Rubaga and is booed. And then you have the exchanges that emerged that I think it's Ofono Pondo who said, whom I had actually tried to get to the show because he contributes a chapter to this book, who said, you either remove your robes and join the politics or stay on the pulpit, don't use that clash. You've written about it. How these recent clashes, how do they fit into one another? Can you help us understand them?
Charles, you call it clash. It's very, very important perhaps to get to terms with the words we use. Should we call it a clash, or it could have been a response? My take is that as the subtitle of that book is that church and politics, or church people or religious people and politicians can cooperate. That's the first point. And if they are cooperating, it enhances nation building. Two, there can be a confrontation. And a confrontation will always arise because of the different value systems that the two may stand for. But there can also be a cooperation. In the history of Uganda, we obviously have seen aspects of, yes, where church has been co-opted, where there have been cooperation, and where there have been confrontation. And what we are seeing is much more really of what a vibrant people should be. It's more of reaction and counter-reaction exchanges, where there is much of the display of the raw power, especially by politicians, and the soft power, especially by the church leaders, where the politicians want to believe that they hold monopoly to issues of display and operationalization of power, and forgetting the fact that the church, or religious leaders for that matter, not church, but religious leaders, hold that soft power, which is so much strong that it can, if put to proper use, even disable.
Would that speak to the church today?
You ask, well, when you say, would it speak? It's all, I think, because the church has not positioned itself as a unit to speak with one voice.
Honor, let me come to you. From your interests in earlier years and to your experiences as a politician, I know, I'm told that no one contests for a parliamentary seat without consulting the local religious leaders. You have to pay a visit to the Catholic Church and have a discussion with them, and then you have to engage with the Anglican Church and now the Pentecostal movement closely if your political fortunes are going to be to bear any fruit. We had an experience. December 31st, 2016, before the elections, President Yoweri Museveni, that night, moved to at least 6 different churches. Went to Kawala, went to Hobiri, went to somewhere what is that place called? Where Express Football Club has its stadium. Wankulukuku, around Wankulukuku area. Went to Kololo airstrip. Went to Nambole. Yes, went to another church down here. Yes, Pastor Vijingo's church. All those churches in one night. Appeared, said a few things and walked away. Now, you come back 1 year later and you're having these heated exchanges. We call it an escalation of, Dr. Pade Musana calls it response. Is it response? Who is responding to who? And he talks about soft power of the church and the raw power of politicians. where's the meeting point?
Look, I think, Charles, the relations between the church or religion and politics is one of the oldest and the most discussed for centuries almost. I think the two institutions are joined at the hip, so to say. You can either consider them partners in crime or a dynamic duo, depending on which angle you are looking. But the bottom line is they are intertwined. They are actually the two most fundamental institutions that have controlled history since, I think, even before Jesus Christ and other prophets. And that relationship has never been changed. That's why the Pope remains one of the most powerful world leaders. He's actually a head of state, you know, and every other head of state always wants to go and meet the Pope. I think the only point of departure in terms of their exercising power is that the politicians have essentially three pillars of power. They have the most fundamental one, which is the people. They have the army, and they have money. The church, perhaps apart from the Vatican, is largely limited to having people. It doesn't have the army. So that is the only difference.
Does it have the money as well?
It has the money. At least the Vatican has the money. But of course, most of the churches in Uganda don't have as much money as the state.
If you say they
and that's where now the state or the politicians have gained an upper hand.
If you say
they have the other two pillars.
If you say
the churches have the people. Yes.
This is a quote in this book from President Yoweri Museveni. It's in the introduction chapter. He says, the book quotes President Museveni as having said, and this is on 11th June 2010, have you ever seen me baptizing people? Have you ever seen Museveni baptizing people? Do you think I don't know the word said when baptizing? I know all of them. Should I recite them? I place this sign on you. This is an outward sign showing the entire world that you have entered the heart of Christ. I know them all, but I cannot baptize anyone. I am a Christian, but I cannot baptize anyone because baptizing is not my luvimbi. Do not think that he who baptizes is more religious than me. I am religious. Baptizing is not my luvimbi. Well, can you draw a line?
The president,
where do you draw the line of people you say are joined at the hip?
He's right and wrong. He's right because, yes, the church must have its limits, but I think he's citing one very, very specific element of what the religious leaders or the Christian leaders do. But there are a lot of other elements that he and the churches share, especially the element of trying to use people and rallying people to agree with you as a source of power. Both elements are using that as the base. And I think that's where the major conflict is. The churches have quite a control over the people who believe in them, and the president also has a control over people who believe in him.
Dr. Ben Bwanika, I've been having difficulty because professionally you're a vet doctor. You've been a politician and run for president of this country 3 times so far. I don't know if you might intend to run again. I suspect you will run again. And you also are a church leader. You said you've been engaged with the church for the last 25 years. Yeah. How do you strike the balance? And if you listen to the advice that was being given to church leaders, discard your robes and enter the murky waters of politics, or stay at the pulpit?
My motto is Martin Luther Jr. He's actually Pastor Martin Luther Jr. All of you, most people don't want to give him his right titles.
Yes, he was a reverend actually.
Yes. He was a pastor of a Baptist church in Alabama, a church called Dexter Baptist Church. All of us know that he contributed heavily to the transformation, to the reform, to the civil rights, and that is the politics that we are talking about. If you're talking about politics, a church and the politicians, they're supposed to be complementing one another. The point of diversion is when the politicians want to use the politics as a tool of control and manipulation. That's where the diversion is. If the politicians want to define politics as an art, as a science of managing people to better their lives, then the church fits in there very well. But if the politicians want to define politics as a tool of control, of manipulation, then religious leaders will never be part of that. I heard you say that the religious leaders in Uganda, they said they don't want change of a constitution. That's not what they said. I listened to the Interreligious Council very well. They said whether government wants to change a constitution, whatever they want to do, they should take it back to the people of Uganda in a referendum. They said changing a constitution should be decided by the people of Uganda through a referendum. And of course, they put themselves in a position to honor whatever the result of the referendum is. They conflicted with the mode of changing the constitution. They didn't say they don't want anyone to change this constitution. You have said President Museveni went around Stadia looking for support. He was looking for support.
You know, he was praying.
No, he was not praying. He was. We haven't seen him again since that time in those areas. You know, we haven't seen him again. He was actually looking for support. And I was at one of those points. I was at Pastor Bujingo's church that night. And when I reached there, I realized that they had been informed that President Museveni is coming. They were aware. They were organized to receive him. I think it is not good for people in politics, I mean to speak the way they are speaking, because these leaders, the religious leaders, have come up to give guidance to the people of Uganda. They haven't told you that when President Museveni says that he wants to come and baptize, he can do so if he thinks that is his. He has what it takes to baptize.
He's saying he doesn't have what it takes. So he says it's not that he doesn't know, but he can't do it because it is
even
not.
He doesn't know.
He says it's not my luvimbi.
No, he doesn't know. Baptism is only just pouring water as he thinks. Dr. Rwanga, the Archbishop of the Catholic Church, Bishop Rwanga of the Orthodox, Dr. Ntagali, Dr. Sirwada, I saw them on the podium giving that guidance. They don't want to be presidents of Uganda. They don't even want to be MPs. They are simply giving guidance to a nation. Politicians must listen. And you must remember that
Well, Dr. Monica, the president also will use the same argument. He doesn't want to become a bishop or archbishop, but he's giving guidance to the people of Uganda.
Yes, all of us, you must remember that all of us are custodians of people.
Yes.
Actually, religious leaders, they stay with those people much more than any politicians. Sometimes we think that politicians give the religious leaders an opportunity to stay with these people. But we have services every day. I meet people, those people every day.
Dr. Bwanika, you wear two suits. One is as a church leader, and the other is as a political player. Over the last so many decades, churches are filling to the brim. You're expanding churches, especially in the new wave of the born-again movement. The misery that the people live with is increasing. And there's been some exasperation from some quarters that the church is not playing its role with its people to demand for better. What explains that? And because there's been an argument that there's been some kind of acquiescence between the churches and the politicians and the people you're supposed to serve, both you as church leaders and the politics, are not being served, being swayed in between.
In fact, in both the church And in the politics, the leaders thrive, the followers do not.
Exactly. What explains that?
No, of course, our kind of politics, you must align yourself very well. It's a politics of alignment. So even the church leaders, they
have aligned themselves.
Yeah, they are aligning themselves to survive. You hear now when church leaders come up, to guide people. You are seeing how they are bashed, so next time we have to think. And I don't think that the politicians are only speaking. They might be inclined to do even other things. They have the power as
Dr. Musana, you studied this. You spent time to study this. And looking at your book, you say responses, which word Dr. Bwaneka modifies to call alignment, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Would that be the same word? Response and alignment. When you align, you're responding.
No. Alignment is much more really to do with the interests. Responses is much more to do with the common good. The common good.
This is what you write in your book. You say responses range from disengagement through active cooperation to prophetic distance and confrontation. Can you explain this in the context of the church and politics today?
Perhaps, again, you would need to take a kind of historical outlook. The case that we have in this book is the common case that is known in Uganda, in spite of the possible extension of underlying issues. The death of the former Archbishop of the Anglican Church of Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, and Bogazaire, Janan Luwum. His admonition, his standing for the people, the position that he took and the voice that he presented of the church amidst terror. Okay? That is what we would call engagement. And we see him paying the ultimate price. He's removed from the scene and annihilated, so to say. The current, I want to say that the current religious leaders, in fact, one of our colleagues, Rosette Muzigo, refers to the church today as failing in its prophetic role and suffering from prophetic amnesia. The church today is so much overtaken by existential issues. That's why in some of the churches we have an imbalance in what we call prosperity. People are kind of trying to find means of survival. Generally we have been put in a survival mode, in which case the search is for the next morsel of bread. We've kind of run away from our core responsibilities. Like Abed would say, if we were to be talking of civil rights, it's only when we address civil rights that now we can be the conscience of the society. Then we can have the prophetic role. Then we can be the Martin Luther King Jr. Right now, it's like I hope every Ugandan knows about these envelopes. Every Ugandan knows that at every consecration of a religious leader, especially from the mainstream institutional churches, there will be some offer. And as you were saying, if at campaign someone moves or hops from one stage to another, he is mobilizing, and there are people who are ready to receive this person, not because of the good services he offers, but because today he may meet their need today for the day. That is the survival mode that we have been put in which case we lack engagement.
And I think that's what gives the politicians the moral authority to tell of the church, unfortunately, because they have compromised the church on groceries. And they can almost sell what are you talking about? Yesterday you are happy to receive this. Now, if we are the people who are giving you, how can we be again people who are not good enough to continue in office? That's the silent message. And then that's one angle. The other angle is, I think the church, the old missionary church, was known to be both a provider of spiritual and material good to the African, by way of school, by way of education, modernizing, what we call the modern society, was a responsibility of the missionaries, of course, working together with the colonial governor and the armed forces. But since then, I think the church, you may not blame it, has really surrendered to the state in terms of trying to deliver the material nourishment to their folk. And now even the people sometimes may find it harder either to believe the church or to believe the politician. So both parties, the politician is obviously seen as guilty because they have not provided, but the church is also silently, people go on Sunday, then they go back home. I'm not saying the church should be handing out, but there is so much trust they are put in the church, but the ability to transform that trust into material and spiritual gain, I think, is a bit lacking.
Dr. Bwaneka, how do you respond to these, to what the submissions of the two gentlemen?
For me, what I think, there is a fear right now among our politicians, those who are in office, because they understand the power of the religious leaders. They understand this is a power center. You can never govern unless those religious leaders are on your side. When they begin to hear dissenting voices from these centers, from the Catholic Church, they hear a leader, from the Anglican, the Muslim, the Pentecostal, every leader must get worried if you are in politics. Because these are voices of the people. They are not only voices.
Isn't that what exactly is being questioned at this moment? That you might say these are voices of the people, but are they really voices of the people?
Yes.
Because the traditional church, when you try, you begin tracing it backwards, you have the traditional churches holding sway and thereby commanding respect and commanding, in many respects, the subservience even of the leaders because of that high authority that the church claims. But progressively, you have the emergence of the Pentecostal movement, which has sliced off a significant number of believers, and therefore, in the overall, weakened the traditional churches. And some people will argue and say, even where you have the traditional churches, what Dr. Pade Musana talked about, that the president is arriving at every consecration with an envelope with keys. Either or both. And therefore, the moral high ground of speaking for the people has been removed from the churches. And some people will argue and say, well, you're playing the same game. You are the politicians.
But of course, some of us even argue that it would be necessary for us to include in our budget a budget line to support religious institutions.
Why, for example?
Yeah, these are, they offer services to the people of Uganda.
Dr. Bwaneka, you're collecting the churches that we see are collecting offertory by the truckloads, by bullion vans.
Yes, but...
Yes. And what Ona said at the beginning of this discussion is that the politicians are taking away from the people to whom they are supposed to be giving a service. The church leaders are taking away from the same people whom they are supposed to be giving and representing. And therefore, the person left in the middle is this poor worshipper, encouraged, on one hand, to pray as hard as possible for a miracle, to sow the biggest seed. On the other hand, being told by the politician, just be comfortable.
Those are easy to say, yes, because you don't know our operations. I know pastors in this country who are sponsoring 2,000, 3,000 kids to school. Yet, one day ago, we were at a funeral ceremony of the late Pastor Michael Mwongi, just here in Katwe. And I saw these kids yelling. For you, when you see us collecting money, you think that Abed is taking money at home. Look at the Catholic Church. How many people the Catholic Church is helping in this country? The best hospitals, they are for the Catholic Church. The best schools, they are for the Catholic Church. When you see them collecting money, for you think they are carrying money home. This money, they return to the people of Uganda. So when the president goes and gives an envelope, what is an envelope, for instance, to Dr. Rwanga at Ruwaga? How much envelope would you give them?
No, I don't think the Catholic bishops have been receiving the vehicles. They don't.
No,
it's been more of the Anglican Church that has received
even the Anglican Church. Over 40% of the people of Uganda, they are Catholics. You are talking about the Pentecostal movement, but over 40%, they are Catholics.
Yes, but
you are talking about
the argument I'm raising, Dr. Bwanika, is the growth of the Pentecostal movement, for example, on one hand, has weakened the sway the Catholic Church held before. Dr. Musana is the researcher. I am not. So I may not speak authoritatively. But the power that the church once held has significantly weakened. And therefore, the politicians can afford to
for me, what I think and what I'm saying, where we are right now, wherever you see the voice, whenever you hear the voices of the religious leaders coming out, especially against the politicians, you know that regime, I don't want to use tough words, they are in their dying moments. They are always the last ones to speak. They restrain themselves. I believe that's why government is now worried. And nobody has survived, I want to say it again. No politician has ever survived. You see what is happening in Congo. It is only the Catholic Church that has come out and they are saying no. So I believe the politicians in Uganda, they are trying to see where we are going. Because when you hear these voices, I've told you, they are speaking on behalf of the people of Uganda. They take time to speak, they restrain themselves, but they have decided to join and they are saying enough is enough. You cannot continue to change the constitution.
Let me throw that question to Dr. Pade Musena. Can the church, in its current form, in this country, and the church taken collectively, claim to be speaking on behalf of the people? And can what the church says today, in reasonable terms, shake the political class?
Perhaps, again, I'm not a historian, but let's look at specifically this government. When it comes into power, it finds a country that is in a multi-party dispensation, yes, and a history of parties that are so much related to religious groups. It brings in an element. Unfortunately, this government has carried out many experiments, not to conclusions. They always abort. It carries out the experimentation of individual merit. I mean, it's not whether you are Roman Catholic, Anglican, or Seventh-day or Muslim, but it's what you can offer. And that experiment was...
Do you think that's accidental, the experimentation? You think it's accidental or
no,
it's deliberate?
It was... I don't know whether it was deliberate or it was for a time, but I'm saying that it's an experiment that was never to a conclusion. Because I would imagine that if we had continued on that, on that move of really implementing individual merit, we wouldn't have gone back to these issues of multi-party politics. I'm saying there is a history to do with multi-party politics with especially religious, in the Christian churches, religious inclinations. That was dealt away with. Now, the unfortunate is, and I wouldn't like to say that the Pentecostals could have, are the ones challenging the power of the institutional or historic churches. No. It's because times have really changed. When we are looking at the modern trends right now, obviously, I make a contribution of the Pentecostals and politics in this book. I'm saying it could be, it can be confused for a third force. The Pentecostals can be confused for a third force. But it would have been if, again, in Uganda we had political parties that are so much related to religious groups. Now that is no more. But they come in, the Pentecostals come in with what you may call also like a movement. Because there is no way, Charles, we can deny that there are Pentecostal characteristics among Roman Catholics today. You will go to Anglican churches now, you'll find that they have taken on Pentecostal characteristics. Even the Pentecostals are kind of, I mean, a broad spectrum that you cannot easily tell, because there are these what we would call classicals and the neo-Pentecostals. So the spectrum is so much blurred that you cannot easily tell who is who. The question should be, should remain whether our religious leaders still have the moral authority to speak to the political class. One of the challenges I get many times is to do with this government having worked so much before it's coming into power with the same religious groups. So, and if you read O's chapter in this book, it shows you how, what kind of cooperation existed between even the guerrillas and these churches. So when you hear right now the church speaking, I mean the politicians speaking the way they are speaking, it's because they know that they have had a history with working with these churches, even when they were guerrillas.
We need to take a quick commercial break, and when we come back, we'll try to ask and attempt to answer the question: do the church leaders have the moral authority to question the politics? After a short commercial break, we'll be right back.
Concerned, the responses are between former colleagues who know each other very well, who know what is not up to the expectations or what is not up to date with which area in the life of the other.
Ona, do you think, your response to that question, do the church leaders, or does the church, in its current composition, have the moral authority to question what the politicians are doing or not doing? Even if you took it where Dr. Banika took it.
Yes and no. Yes, because one, the church or the church leaders, if you want to focus on them, are citizens of Uganda. And I think every citizen is entitled to question what their government does. It's part of the constitutional rights, it's part of what is supposed to be normal in any modern country or a democracy. So on that score alone, I think they absolutely, like the rest of us, should question government. I think
the question is specific. Do they have the moral authority?
They have.
Yes.
On that level. I think where their moral authority lessens a little is not that they are not, as I said earlier, they are not like you and me. They and President Museveni both owe society. Society has given them as much, in fact, more trust than even the government. The government may be earning its trust through election, through a bit of coercion, through a bit of using resources. But these are people who have a following that is absolutely voluntary. People get out of their own houses, some of them throughout the week, some of them only on Sunday. They go to the churches, and they take the leaders as the alpha and omega. So I think at that level, they share as much blame as the state in terms of alleviating the welfare of the people, especially in terms of the crisis of lack of incomes. My belief is that there is no shortage of money in this country. It's just that the money has never been applied to the right uses on the part of the government in particular. Now, the church, with all that trust people have in it, does not even have to get money from the state. I think it can get money from the people and use modern means of organizing that money to improve the welfare of their followers. such that the same things they are criticizing government for, they should at least demonstrate on their part, within their limited means, that they can do better. While criticizing government, they should also do something, because there are people before them who see them as, they see them, as I've said, more than they even see perhaps the president. They worship them, some of them literally. They are kissing their feet, some of them. So what are you going to do about these people who are falling at your feet? You can't blame another person. You should do something.
Dr. Bwanika, do you as church leaders, or do the church leaders, feel free to separate your two personalities as and when you can. Do church leaders have the moral authority to question what the politicians are doing?
Of course, it is a tricky question, because I know you are basing on the viewers on some few church leaders, religious leaders that have not acted well. We know that we have seen Ona is talking about those who are even following and kissing. we definitely have some problems within the religious institutions, like elsewhere in this country, where people have not used what is in their hands properly. But generally, when you look at the religious institutions in this country, I think they have the moral authority. Look at their institutions. Pick the Catholic Church and look at what they are doing in terms of education, in terms of medical, the health services. They are bridging the gap. Look at the Protestant church. They used to lag behind, but since the late Nkoyo, whom we have just buried, they picked up. When the former Archbishop, the one from Nebi,
Luke
Colombe.
Yeah, he did a superb work. They invested, they built institutions, they supported kids. They are helping even to create jobs, which is not supposed to be their work. Look at us, the Pentecostals.
The president says he's also supporting kids.
Yes, the Pentecostals.
Scholarship.
We are building schools. That should not have been our domain. Our domain should be for people to come in the church. We pray for them. We give them guidance spiritually. But we are in schools. We are in hospitals. Orphanages. We are doing what we can do best within our limited resources.
Why are you doing that?
Because the government is not doing their work.
So when do you have the time to question,
the people of Uganda,
when do you have the time to question why the government is not doing what it is supposed to be doing when you are stepping in to do it?
Yes, but I have kids in my church under my ministry that I believe should not ever lose their opportunity. I come on this media, I keep talking to a government which doesn't listen. Am I going to just keep watching these kids?
What do you do? That's the question. Because there is a significant clash here, or maybe misunderstanding. The traditional institutional churches, the Catholic Church, the Anglican Church, the Islamic faith especially, did what they did partly because what they were doing helped advance the interests of the government that existed, or attempt to respond to the power play between the church and the power holders, the political power holders. The Anglican Church directly was built on those agreements signed by the missionaries, some of them, the missionaries who helped establish the colonial project in Uganda and much of Africa. The Catholic Church was contesting for the same power. Who would have more power between Rubaga and Namirembe? And therefore, that over and on its own necessitated the need to win over people by providing them certain services. In the modern day, members of parliament will tell you, we need to be paid reasonably because we are paying school fees, our people are poor, they will tell you all sorts of reasons. When you find them in the caucus, they'll tell you the wonderful things. They'll tell you how wonderful the government is. When they go back to look for the vote, they cry about the poverty among the people. If the church is doing exactly the same, you don't question that what people are doing, collect offertory and explain it by saying we are sponsoring education for children. Who is going to ask the critical questions that a Ugandan who doesn't find themselves entangled either between the church or the politics can still be able to get the service? And what does that mean? Yes?
Charles, I think we should not advocate for what we may call a sharp divide between the church or religious institutions and politics. The two must be partners in development.
Mm-hmm.
They must find common ground for cooperation. And that's very, very important. The church or religious institutions are not just exclusively for spiritual prosperity. No. Because as an individual, a person is a whole, and the needs can be social, psychological, economic, and the church must be in position to meet these needs as much as government must. But I think in our debate or in our discussion, we should identify those areas where there must be cooperation. And where we are coming from is where we find, like, politicians, like the ones who have hunted their animal, and they are sending their dogs now to scare away others to say, no, this is ours. Now, that is where, if the religious institutions have the moral authority, they should stand up and challenge. If, I'm saying if, we should be able to challenge government. We must bring to debate the governance issues. We must bring into debate democratic principles and issues, just objectively.
Let me just pick up from especially the Pentecostal church. A lot of the preaching in the Pentecostal churches, or born-again churches, if that is the more correct word to use, born-again churches, over the last few decades, is the prosperity gospel. How does that fit into the equation of questioning politics?
Again, if we go back to the formula of partners in development, and an individual as being a whole, with obviously physical, economic, social interests and psychological interests, spiritual interests. The prosperity gospel, if I have studied it well, talks about wholeness, an entity which is whole, that God desires you to be prosperous, both as your soul prospers, so your body should prosper. In which case there is totality. There is what we may call now salvation or fullness or wholeness. Now,
that's a departure from earlier Christian teaching.
Yes, because
the earlier Christian teaching tended to exalt.
I think
to exalt poverty in a way, almost by condemning wealth and saying it's easier for a
camel to go through the eye of a needle than
a
rich man to enter the kingdom
of heaven.
Yes.
Now you have all this concentration on the prosperity gospel, and you can't talk prosperity and at the same time talk about government delivering services.
No, but prosperity, the unfortunate is, I think we can argue this case like this. Prosperity is a very right teaching, except it has been taken advantage by some people, and misrepresented. That's very, very important.
I can see Dr. Wanka is itching to jump in there.
First of all, I want to go back to whether the church leaders, the religious leaders, have done their work in representing the people of Uganda to become their voices. I do believe that many times religious leaders have betrayed the people of Uganda when it comes to voicing what is within our people, what is obtaining. They have had many chances. They have sat with the president, they have sat with ministers, and sometimes you are disturbed with their sentiments. Some of them, instead of telling the president, giving him guidance on what is obtaining on the ground, they are talking about personal issues. I've been in many meetings, and I always wonder, in that area, many of them have not voiced the voice of the people they are leading. I believe that's where they have not performed well. And a good number of them. They are people, they are in poverty, the education is not okay, but you find these religious leaders, they always go to State House for a national day of, Thanksgiving. The president sits there waiting to hear from them, but you hear someone asking for school fees for
for the children they're helping, or their own children.
No, even for their own children.
But how do you explain that the president?
Yeah, but the president has
that the president sits on the throne.
Yes.
And is listening to all these religious leaders, the moral code holders or interpreters, presenting petitions
exactly
to him, and he's the solver of the problems.
Yes.
And then you walk out and tell people that you kneel down and pray to God, you'll solve your problems.
Even the presidents in Uganda
has
also presented itself as the sole owner of power.
Sorry, gentlemen, I have some callers I need to pick. But let me start with Bernard Ampairwe, who says the dilemma here is that churches are comprised of a congregation of a variety of different political opinions, or different political parties to be precise. They only need to play a guidance role and leave the decision making to the believers. Where the problem comes is where the church leaders have the personal attachment to specific parties. The likes, he mentioned some church leaders here, they need to draw the boundaries between church roles and the individual political affiliations. Bernard Mpairwe from Lubaga, Kampala. And then he adds, but the contradictions are many. Let's not forget that the Democratic Party belonged to Catholics.
Yeah.
And Uganda People's Congress to Protestants. I don't know where they were locally belong. NRM? This is historical. Where do they locally belong?
But NRM, it was not started by locally. In my church, for me, I'm in politics. In the church where I lead, people are free. By the way, I have NRM, I have everyone. People are free to, align themselves.
Just a quick one.
Yes.
I want to react to the guidance element. I think, to me, I would put a lot of premium on guidance on political choices or whatever. But I think one of the crises we have as a society, someone may say, is a moral crisis, a crisis of ethics, crisis of right and wrong. While the church generally welcomes sinners, I think it should also have the strength to tell the sinners when to stop. So long as the church itself occasionally is seen to be as unethical, as the secular,
as sinful,
as the secular institutions, then we are in a crisis. Because where is the guidance going to come from? Because it's not enough to have money. You can say, I would love all the schools and hospitals be switched to the religious institutions, because they had a history, and also generally would assume that their leaders are much more morally upright and would deliver the service.
Okay.
But if some of the happenings in religious institutions are anything to be believed, then you start getting worried.
Okay, we'll need to pick some. We need to pick some callers. Leslie Amanzuru William says politics is an appearance of the clergy ideology to public management, and religion is the real reality of politics. Hello. Hello? Hello?
Hello, good evening.
Good evening, sir. Can you turn down the volume on your TV set, please?
Hello.
Yes, sir. We can hear you. Your name, sir?
I'm happy for this program, Mr. Mangusha.
Thank you.
Many church leaders have already been bribed.
We're listening.
I'm called Isaac Rovega.
Yes, Isaac.
Many church leaders have been bribed by politicians.
Mm.
So they have no moral authority. Yes.
Okay.
Mm.
Thank you.
Yes. So they have no moral authority
They have no more authority. Okay.
to criticize politicians.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Isaac. Do you have another caller? Hello? Hello?
Hello?
Yes, sir. Your name and where you're calling from?
My name is Tivo. I'm calling from Kantanga.
Yes, please.
It was important to host Mr. Wanika.
Yes.
Do you realize that most of the born-again churches are owned by people they call Rwandese?
They call?
Rwandese.
Uh-huh.
Yes. So, the way you're discussing the political question and the born-again churches is that, please, it bends on one side.
How do you mean?
That these churches, look at the percentage of the born-again in Uganda.
Mm-hmm.
98% are Rwandese. Do you realize that? Mr. Mangusha,
Yes.
you realize that?
I can hear you, but I'm wondering about your statistics. What is the basis of your claim?
Look at Mr. Wanika, the church goers in his church.
Dr. Bwanika is here. He'll respond. He says I should ask you that you have the evidence.
There is no evidence. I know that.
He's suggesting that you are Rwandese.
That you're one of them.
No. I don't have any roots in Rwanda. At least I know my lineage up to 1600.
Hello? Hello? We have a caller. Hello?
Yes, this is Grace from Toro.
Yes, Grace. Go ahead and with your question or comment.
Thank you for the program.
You're welcome.
Now,
Yes, Grace? Grace, can you try and call us again? I think the call got dropped. Hello? Hello?
Hello.
Yes, sir. Your name and where you're calling from?
My name is Ereso. Good evening.
Good evening, sir.
I wanted to say like this. Let us focus this discussion.
Yes, please.
The question is about the matter which came up as a result of the constitutional amendment and the comments by the church leaders. My question is, the context in which the church leaders comment on matters of politics, are they also not bound by the existing laws of the land?
Like?
So, for example, in a matter of the amendment of the Constitution, which is just recently took place,
yes,
the church must also take into account the provisions in the Constitution which determine the manner in which an amendment is made. So while they take these comments as their spiritual leaders and the rest of it, do they also, and are they bound by the provisions of the Constitution?
Okay. Thank you. I'm not sure I understand the question, but
I understand.
Dr. Bwanek understands, so he'll respond to you. Can we pick another? Hello? Hello?
Hello.
Yes, sir. Your name and where you're calling from?
I am Huntington calling from Bunga.
Yes, Huntington. Go ahead. Go right ahead with the question or comment.
The church has a place and a role to play in politics. That's the first thing I wanted to say. The second one is its role is prophetic. To speak the voice of God, not just even the voice of the people. To speak the voice of God into the morals of the nation, the ethics of the nation. The church is the salt and light. Therefore, the church should be giving guidance if there are issues of justice, like people are being killed, the church should be able to speak. If there are issues of abortion and the government is doing nothing about it, the church is there to bring clarity. And therefore, the church should not necessarily be partisan. They should only be speaking things that bring guidance and wisdom into the leadership of the nation.
Thank you, Hannington. Thank you. Thank you for your comment. Someone here, Semanda Alawi says, religious leaders in Uganda are doing commendable work for Ugandans. Many have joined forces to contribute and produce Nehemiah actions, going beyond offering prayers to social justice initiatives, which the state is failing to do. On issues that affect people and many fear to speak against, e.g. the now praised Archbishop Janan Luum spoke against Amin when others were scared. In El Salvador, Archbishop Oscar Romero lost his life for challenging the nation's dictatorial regime in the 1980s. The problem in Uganda is that lately the state is also influencing the process of choosing top church leaders.
You see?
I commend the Catholic Church for speaking for Ugandans. Honor, you're saying you see? Yes.
Yeah, I mean, if it's right that the state even influences who becomes bishop and what have you, then the church is in big trouble. Because I said earlier that one of the things the church should be doing is, for example, set a very strong code in terms of its own adherence to principles. For example, even the issue of this donation of cars from the state, the church could actually say that we appreciate, but no, it's part of our principle that we shall not take donations from the state. Because I tell you, for example, there are corporate companies that enforce such regulations, that they don't take gifts. It's not an insult to the state, but it's just part of the code. Then from there, the state's role to interfere in the election of the bishop and what have you lessens.
Dr. Wanika, there's an interesting message here. Yes. Someone says church leaders go to State House to ask for cars, etc. Nothing to do with their congregations, but personal to them. Then they turn around and criticize when they fail to get what they want. It's a double-edged sword.
Of course, that's where my reservations were. when church leaders are supposed to voice out the concerns of people and they center on what is personal. But Mr. Hannington has brought in even another element, that the church leaders are also supposed to voice the voice of God. You know, the 31st I didn't go out, I remained at home. And I kept on listening, juggling from one station to another. Thousands in these stadiums, in churches, waiting to hear from our church leaders. What is the direction of the country for 2018? And I left.
What did you get?
I just sat at my bed without. I was surprised. Then the next day, I went to Google to listen to what the Nigerian church leaders spoke, and you can see the difference.
What explains Uganda's difference?
Exactly like what that gentleman, the message I said to you. Sometimes we tend to center on these personal issues. We forget that we are a voice of God. How can we enter? How can you call thousands of people in this stadium and we fail to hear a statement that thus says the Lord for Uganda, thus says the Lord for the leadership of this nation? Take this direction. I didn't hear that. I think,
but I think that's the crux of the discussion we've been having.
Yeah, of course, that's where there's a problem.
Yes, and someone here is saying it would be unfair to pass blanket judgment as to whether the church leaders have more authority to check politicians. The clergy aren't all the same. Some church leaders have the moral authority, without doubt, while others don't. And most of the time, those that don't know themselves, do they?
Of course, we cannot pass a blank judgment on all the religious leaders. Some of them have done extraordinarily very well. So, but also someone he asked a question. He made a statement that whether the church leaders, the religious leaders, are not bound by the obtaining provisions of the law, of the constitution. When they were amending this constitution, there were two, openings through which we could amend this constitution. A provision that empowers Parliament, and another provision, Article 1 and Article 255, that brings back the power to the people of Uganda. The religious leaders gave a guidance that because of the importance of this provision that talks about presidency, it should be the people of Uganda who should make a decision through a referendum. I think they did very well in that area to guide the nation.
Are you concerned that rather than be listened to, those sentiments were being dismissed
of course,
by government functionaries?
Of course, there I have problems with government. They didn't listen, and right now
they don't listen because you don't matter. As church leaders,
of course,
you don't matter in the
but
political
who
equation.
matters in Uganda apart from where the center of power is?
Dr. Patemusana, wouldn't you say that the failure to listen, Dr. Bwanika says he blames the political actors, the government, for not listening. Do the church leaders matter? It's the political equation.
They do matter. That's why there is this kind of talk that they should be silent. Essentially, they matter. Everyone knows what power the religious leaders hold. And that's why there are attempts to bribe them, to silence them. Those who cannot be bribed are being backed at so that they can be silent.
Honor, do they matter in the current context?
They matter, but of course we have to see from the real happenings. If the state functionaries can tell them off, then unfortunately they increasingly don't matter, because they have been, for lack of a better word, compromised. And I think the tragedy for both the church leaders and the followers is really what we have all agreed is survival, the issue of poverty. And I think for the church to regain its authority, it must address that material desperation of the followers and ultimately the leaders as well. Because if the church leaders are supposed to be helped by their followers to have a sustenance, to buy cars and what have you, and the followers are unable to raise enough money, then the state comes in as a well-wisher, and he who pays the piper calls the tune. So I think the church needs to retrace and say, how do we empower our followers? And then they become our backbone, and we can challenge the state as equals. Not to overthrow the state, but when we go to the table, we are not dependent on the state. But you're already hearing, I mean, like the state is now paying the local leaders. Maybe soon they'll be paying the church leaders as well.
Dr. Bwanika, because we have pretty much run out of time, we have about two minutes to end this show. Are the church leaders failing to realize their power? That they have to go down on their knees to the politicians, either to give them cars or whatever it is?
I think there are few church leaders, religious leaders that have benefited from the handouts from the government. There are very few. We shouldn't be worried about those. There are very few. But the point I'm picking, which is, I think, which one is talking about, is for the church to regain their position as centers, as sources of the prophetic voice for the nation. That is very, very important. Both as a voice of God and as a voice of people. If we can regain that within the religious centers, then the politicians and all the other people, they will listen. But I've given you an example. People come in this stadium waiting to hear what God is telling them for 2018. You receive, you keep quiet, or you don't have anything to tell them. Then you lose your power as a voice of God. That's where a problem is.
But the assumption would be that you actually have the power as the voice of God.
Sometimes they have these messages, but they fear to deliver them. They just fear. The church should know that they will be there with this presidency or not. You know, when you start pegging your survival on a regime, then you are bound to do mistakes.
Okay, we're supposed to get out of here. Our time is pretty much out. But just one last question to you, Dr. Bwanika. I kept going on and on about this prosperity gospel. Dr. Pade Musana defended it. But you hear less and less of the religious leaders basing the gospel on the principles of hard work and telling people, turning people into people who are praying for healing, praying for miracles. At the end of the day, magicians. I do not know how much real empowerment that prosperity gospel gives to the people who are supposed to be working. Because at the end of the day, and we have heard of these stories, I haven't experienced it, I haven't seen it personally, but categorizing people. The one paying higher gets a special prayer. The one paying less doesn't get that special prayer. At the end of the day, there seems to be a conspiracy between the church, especially the born-again church, and the politicians to impoverish the people, because people are borrowing money to go and give the biggest seed, hoping that their miracle will come from there. In that circumstance, you can't also stand and say, by the way, wait a minute, how do we deal with the question of poverty in this country? Yeah. Who do we ask? What is God telling us about this poverty?
Of course, within our society, there are some serious abuses that you are bringing out. But you know, the church, like the nation, has been growing. When I got born again, the first few sermons that I heard from our churches were that God is not interested in your degrees. But I had one, I saw I was in trouble when I entered that area. Mm. But now, when you go to every church in the Pentecostal circles where I go, they are promoting education. Pastors are going back to school. They are telling their followers to go to school. Church grows like a nation grows. Mm. So, of course, there are those few elements, because we don't have control. Some of these people, they are registered by government. This nation, you are free to associate, you are free to go to any region you want. I'm not going to come. Sometimes we try to go and tell government that, look here, this is what is happening. But we find government officials seated at the pulpit of that church. What are you going to do? Mm-hmm. We find generals go to that church. You are not going to close it. So
and jointly, you're serving some sedative to your followers.
Yes, all those abuses. As long as the government wants to control the churches themselves. If government wants to control, they are the ones who register churches. We told them leave that work to the church. They refuse. They say, we are the ones who are registered. They register in churches as NGOs at one time. Even when you are not doing an NGO work, they demand that you register as an NGO. We fought that. They still want to have control. Mm. You know, you cannot have control.
And you have also been lobbying for the last, I think, about 10 years or so.
Yes.
For the born-again movement to be recognized as a faith.
Yes,
Uganda.
so that
and therefore your hands are pretty much tied. You can't push when you're still waiting to get something out of it.
No, if I see, I know many churches where they are abusing people, they are doing what is not in the Bible, but I cannot go there to stop them. They are telling me, we have a certificate, you didn't register us.
Our time is out, we need to get out of here.
Yes, yeah, I think for me the summary is that the churches are doing a good job, but specifically on the issue of prosperity, that is where the crisis is. I think they are serving a wonderful job as, I would say, fundraising clubs, investment clubs, but it's simply a question of spreading out the benefits of these fundraisings. That's what they need to work on. I have no problem with a pastor owning a planes, as some of them do, so long as the followers are also owning bicycles. But if they are footing, that's the crisis.
Dr. Musana.
Perhaps my comment. My view is that church is beyond the congregations that we go to. Church is much more to do with the kingdom of God realized on earth, in the present, here and now. It's not necessarily a future hope that we anticipate. It's supposed to be established here. Every time someone prays what some people call the Lord's Prayer, there is that phrase, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth.
And give us our daily bread.
Let me say this. As Ugandans, this is my appeal to us, that we are in a very critical moment in our history, where our motto is being undermined. We say, for God and my country. And for me, that is more than a statement, more than a motto, but a prayer. How I wish and desire that we would raise to the occasion and stop looking at our denominational differences or where we go when, but make sure that we work for the establishment of the kingdom of God on earth, and especially to work for the good of the neighbor, both church leaders and politicians.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pade Musana, Makerere University. Thank you very much, Honour Peter Ekomole. Thank you very much, Dr. Abed Bwanika. Of course, we didn't discuss a few other issues, told even on the negotiation for power, which you hinted on at the beginning of the show. This government engaging with church leaders before it came into power, what kind of negotiations, who has kept their part of the bargain, who hasn't kept their part of the bargain, how does that influence the kind of discussions that exist between the two institutions? I
just wanted to throw in a small spanner in the works. I think for me, I believe the church, especially the traditional, has some of the best potential leaders of the secular world because of the ability to manage large numbers of people. And there should be no fear. This idea of saying they should take off the collars. I actually welcome that in the future, when there's a vacuum in the presidency, I think people like bishops should be in the queue. Because they have experience. They have experience because one of the crises Africa faces
production wants me out of here.
You have leaders,
gentlemen,
who have no experience in managing people and they become a disaster.
Honor should not be rooting for the institutional churches. As I said, irrespective of where you go, the future is bright. There are so many people who have modern governance principles whom we should look to.
The vice president of Nigeria is actually a pastor.
You're talking about vice presidents. Yes, I am told that certain religions hold vice presidents and deputy positions. Others must hold a quota within the cabinet. Others must hold one. And that's part of the broader crisis. Our time is up. We need to get out of here. Thank you very much to you all, our viewers, for joining us tonight and always. And thank you very much to those of you who gave us feedback and each one who watched the show. The debate continues on our social media platforms. And of course, like I said at the beginning of the show, other reporting, especially on that very interesting story on the Border 2010, will continue in our subsequent programming, and especially the news updates. From me, it's a good night.